The German economy grew in the second quarter, propped up by household and government spending and beating analyst expectations that saw it on the edge of a downturn. Data released today shows that Europe's largest economy grew by 0.1% quarter on quarter and 1.7% on the year, adjusted for price and calendar effects. Analysts had expected the economy to stall quarter on quarter in the 3 months to June, in line with the Statistics Office earlier flash estimate. Imports of goods into the UK from Russia shrank by 96.6% to just £33 million in June, the lowest since records began in January 1997. For the first time on record, there were no imports of fuel from Russia, according to the figures from the Office of National Statistics. Although exports to Russia slightly increased in June 2022, they dropped by £168 million compared with the monthly average before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, says the bank must take climate change into account when making decisions, as it has a clear impact, especially on inflation. Lagarde said that if more climate disasters, droughts, and famines occur throughout the world, there will be repercussions on prices, on insurance premiums, and on the financial sector. And Brent crude rose above $100 a barrel today as supply concerns put upward pressure on the oil price after a brief spell below the threshold. This week's rally follows a bigger than expected drop in U.S. inventories and the prospect of OPEC alliance members cutting outputs in the event of a return of Iran supplies. The latest spike in prices came despite this week's gloomy economic figures. And you're watching Business Edge. We're live in Lagos, Nigeria. State capture in South Africa has been concluded, but the impact is far from over. One of the firms mentioned in the investigation is the subject of our next conversation. Stay with us. The UK has barred global consulting firm Bain and Company from submitting bids for public contracts as a result of its connections to wrongdoing in South Africa during former President Jacob Zuma's tenure. Now, following this decision, there have been calls for Bain to face the same restrictions in South Africa. The South African Revenue Service was being restructured when Bain was discovered to have connections to unlawful business operations. Senior personnel were fired, and the organization's capacity for conducting investigations has been severely diminished. Joining me now from Cape Town, South Africa, is Karim Singh. He's the Executive Director of Corruption Watch South Africa. Karim, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me on this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me on the program.
So let's really look at what the issues with Bain and Company in South Africa have been. Now, Stephen York, the managing partner in South Africa, admitted the company made serious mistakes in the procurement and execution of its work at SARS, but still says that there's a lot of false narrative out there. So what exactly did the Commission of Judicial Inquiry find?
Well, thanks. First of all, there were two commissions of inquiry. First, there was a very specific commission that just looked at the South African Revenue Service, which was called the Nugent Commission of Inquiry. And following that commission, there were adverse findings against Bain, the fact that Bain had been brought in, that there were consultations with them prior to them being appointed, and that they engaged in a process basically as management consultants in denuding and decapacitating SARS, which had been a sort of best-in-class tax revenue agency. Then when the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into State Capture launched in 2018, they looked again at the issue of SARS, and they received testimony from a high-profile whistleblower, a gentleman called Athol Williams, who's written a book, and he's now fled South Africa on the basis that his personal safety was in danger. And he speaks then again further, that there are further adverse findings against Bain in this Commission of Inquiry for the role that they played in facilitating state capture. So it really was on this basis that Lord Peter Hain, along with Athol Williams, went to the parliamentary office in the UK and were able to get Bain, to basically be debarred or blacklisted in the UK, following findings against them in South Africa. So it is quite a curious circumstance where Bain have been sanctioned overseas, but they've yet to be sanctioned in South Africa.
All right, so we'll get to that in a bit, as well as the work that Lord Bain has done. But in terms of the consequences of Bain's collusion, and that's what it's been described as, collusion between Bain and former President Jacob Zuma, what are the consequences that South Africa has seen?
Well, the consequences was that the revenue agency, SARS, went from being what was considered one of the best tax collection agencies in the world, certainly a leading revenue collection agency in the developing world, to really losing their way, to losing lots of strategic personnel, to losing their independent investigative capacity to go after tax non-compliant taxpayers, and to then for tax collection in South Africa to take a real hit. So basically, over this period where Bain were consulting, we really saw SARS go from being a very effective organization to being highly ineffective. And what we've seen in the last few years has been an attempt to resuscitate SARS, to recapacitate it by bringing in new leadership. And on current reports, SARS is in a much better position now than it was during this period when Bain was consulting.
All right, so the former Labour Minister, anti-apartheid campaigner, Lord Peter Bain, he was one of those leading the call for the British government to penalize the company, and he described their role as despicable. The role of Bain was despicable in South Africa's biggest post-apartheid corruption scandal. So now the UK has barred them for 3 years from submitting for public or government contracts. And many say that this move should put pressure on the US, where the company is headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, to also do the same. So let me ask you this. Do you think the US will also fall in line with the UK before we get to South Africa possibly falling in line, and also either penalize or sanction the company in one way or the other?
So that's a good question. I don't really know where we are in terms of pursuing consequence management or accountability for Bain. We do know that the Security and Exchange Commission in the US has been one of the leaders in terms of sanctioning corporate actors that are seen to be non-compliant with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So it's certainly something for us to consider now going forward, whether that is the type of justice we could pursue in the US through the SEC. But it's difficult for me to speculate on where we are with that.
Okay. So we've heard from the acting Director General of the South African Treasury, who has urged the private sector to stop doing business with Bain and Co. But many have also asked about the government. As you said earlier, we're still waiting to see what South Africa's government will do to penalize, to sanction, to have consequences for Bain in regards to this situation. So what is the expectation? What are the, I guess we'd say, the body language we're probably getting from the Ramaphosa administration in terms of what they're going to do about Bain and Co.?
So what the Ramaphosa administration said very clearly was that they would provide a comprehensive response to the various recommendations coming out of the Zondo Commission. And you're talking about hundreds, if not up to, several hundred different types of recommendations that go, span reform of the political system, to reform of key institutions, to pursuing prosecutions and asset recovery, that the presidency would provide a comprehensive response within 90 days of receiving the final installment of the Zondo Commission's report. So that puts us into around October, where we would expect to see something tabled before Parliament from the president in terms of how they're going to deal with the recommendations. There isn't a specific recommendation in the Zondo report which says that Bain should be debarred or somehow banned from doing business in South Africa. But it does talk about the need for further investigations and consequence management for Bain, excuse me, and other corporate actors such as McKinsey, such as Nedbank, and others who were implicated in.
It's all right, Karim, just take a break and cough it out, no problem. It happens to the best of us. All right, so there's no specific recommendation, as you said, from the Zondo Commission. I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here. President Ramaphosa was also former President Jacob Zuma's vice president. And while he's not so much specifically mentioned as being implicated, there are questions as well to his own credibility and possibly any role. Do you have faith that his administration will look at these recommendations and not come back with soft side of the recommendations, but really hand down some serious prosecution, investigation, even jail time if necessary for many people involved with the state capture controversy?
I would say yes and no, that there is a window of opportunity that President Ramaphosa has to really show his mettle when it comes to the fight against corruption. There are people within his own party who are opposed to comprehensive systemic anti-corruption measures taking place. But it's important to note that the president isn't the only mandate holder, that we still have a constitutional democracy and a rule of law in South Africa, and that there are other agencies that are independent that have obligations to take forward some of these recommendations, including the prosecuting authority, including the Revenue Service, including Department of Trade and Industry and other key players within the South African polity. So everything doesn't sort of land specifically on the president's table, but certainly this is now an opportunity for the president to drive an anti-corruption agenda, because we have a clear set of recommendations, a clear kind of forensic report which showed what happened under state capture and who was responsible for it. So it really is an opportunity for the president to pursue justice remedies, to pursue consequence management. But given the political dynamics in South Africa, we can't be completely confident that the president will seize the nettle and lead us into a new dawn on this.
All right, so I have one more question that feels like I'm going to circle back to that. But before that, let me ask about Athol Williams. Now, with the public letter of apology, he's been very vocal. He said that he basically discounted the public letter of apology coming from Bain. He said that he needed full disclosure and South Africans needed full amends, and that the apology was in fact an insult to South Africans. What do you make of this open letter, which also says that a false narrative has been set about the company in regards to this issue?
No, I would align myself squarely with the comments of Athol Williams on this one. Bain, McKinsey, and some of the others that have been implicated in state capture have failed to give a full accounting of the role that they've played. Bain was given multiple opportunities to fully account for their role in what they did at SARS. There have been other if you look at what Mr. Williams is saying, that there may have been irregularities in terms of other consultancies that Bain was involved in, particularly at Telkom, the National Telecommunications enterprise. So until Bain gives a full account of what they did, a full acknowledgement, then their apology falls a little bit on deaf ears. Even the way in which money has been repaid to the South African government has been done in a way which hasn't been consistent with a kind of rule of law and real kind of accountability. So, until we see that accountability, I think, that the apologies that we receive are, are suspect, are open to kind of being viewed somewhat cynically.
All right, Karen, my final question is about justice. You've mentioned, of course, McKinsey & Co. being implicated, Bain and Company, SAP SE, KPMG LLP, ABBA or ABB Limited as well. These are all companies that have accepted responsibility for improper work and in some cases have paid back some amount of money, all of it coming back to the state capture scandal involving former President Jacob Zuma. But where do you think justice will be found? Is it enough for the companies to admit some level of wrongdoing and agree to compensate the South African government to some level? Is that really justice?
No, it's not justice. We've seen the way big corporations deal with these types of allegations by paying back the money. It seems to almost be kind of a cost of doing business. So, accountability would look something closer to what the UK government did. A cooling off period, a debarment. It doesn't have to be permanent, but it also has to be built upon a set of full disclosures. So, and then going down another level to actual accountability for individuals who hide behind the corporate veil that were involved in facilitating these kinds of activities. When it comes to corporate liability, we never see it go down that next level to see individual accountability for the leaders of those corporations. And I think this is a real challenge going forward in the fight against corruption, is seeing the way the system can deal with corporate accountability and taking it down to the individual level.
All right, Karim Singh, thank you so much for your time. Please make sure you take care of that cough, and we look forward to talking to you further. One of those days, it's happening with a frog in his throat, but we did get the main details of this conversation. Bain and Co. Has been banned in the UK. Will the South African government face the demons of this situation and also take the bull by the horn? Will the US also follow, with the company headquartered in its country being linked to wrongdoing, impropriety, and corruption here on the continent? Those are questions that we look forward to having answers to sometime soon. When we come back, we get into the market realities for African fintechs, COVID-19, Russia, Ukraine, and of course, rising inflation and much more. How are they weathering the storm? Stick around.